Welcome to Next Gov. We're talking about the budget. We're day two now, but there's still lots to break down. It's a big document, lots for us to pick out and learn from. So today we're joined by Chris Wiedemann from immixGroup. He's a market consultant. He's going to help us walk through some of the interesting IT things that he's found in this budget. Chris, thanks for joining us.
Absolutely.
So starting off, where's the IT budget specifically sit compared with past years? The total civilian spending is creeping up a little bit year over year. Is it significant? Is this a big jump, or is this just a little bit?
So the overall numbers come with a slight asterisk because they withheld the DoD IT estimates for FY19. My assumption is that those will also be slightly up. So I would say that if you're just comparing top line figures, 19 in the request is not a huge increase. It is an increase. But the broader caveat is always that the president's budget requests, the numbers that they contain are not really the most important thing about that document, right? It's more about, broadly, it's sort of an ideological statement, but also reflects kind of management priorities. So that's the lens that we take when we're looking at it. We don't focus as much on requested funding levels.
Well, there are definitely lots of interesting statements of, if not quite statements of policy, definitely intention in there. We saw things like shared services was mentioned, the modernizing government technology, the revolving fund actually got funded.
Yep.
We saw things like the ITOR, the Information Technology Oversight and Reform, and OMB. They were saying in their part of the budget actually that they wanted to staff up their cybersecurity oversight area, even though there was a little bit less money for that in the budget. Mm-hmm. So yeah, you're right. We did see some of those things. Did any of those pronouncements, did any of that kind of jump off the page at you? Anything really leap at you?
Nothing dramatic. So in general IT terms, I think the sort of guiding document is still the modernization report that the American Technology Council put out in December. I didn't see anything in the budget that veers too dramatically from there, other than, as you said, maybe slightly more emphasis on shared services. They got mentioned not only in the, I don't know what you would call it, preamble or introductory segments, but also down at individual agencies. There was a lot of mention of, move to shared services as part of the general agency overhaul or modernization process that I think the administration wants. But we go back to the IT modernization report as again sort of the guiding framework. I hear that a lot from the people that I talk to as well, outside of what we saw in the budget request. I guess the only other thing that I really noticed, and it's not new, but I think notable that it's included in the budget language, is the GSA Center of Excellence concept. So that fits in as well with the shared services idea, but locates those COEs at GSA, and then also, it was sort of a one-sentence description, but talks a little bit about what they're going to do. So centers of excellence and things like cloud, data center consolidation, call centers, which we've heard about, but again, seeing it in the budget, I think is significant. So broadly, that's what we are taking from this.
What did you see about call centers? I didn't notice that one.
Just that there's a GSA Center of Excellence on call center modernization that they want to stand up, which again, we had heard maybe rumors of that. It's the kind of thing you hear discussed at conferences and but it's significant to see it put on paper like this.
So conversely, was there anything that was conspicuously absent from the budget? Was there anything you expected to see in there that you didn't?
Yes and no. I think what surprised me the most was the reductions. And I know I said we don't look too hard at actual dollar amounts here, but still, when you see requested funding levels, it does give you some sense of priorities, right? And what surprised me was the net reduction to government research and development spending. And I think there was a reasonable expectation based on, rhetoric or based on some other actions that we've seen over the last year, that might be an area where they were looking to increase funding or at the very least keep levels constant. And there is certainly a significant increase in the DoD budget. But specific civilian agencies are losing substantial research and development investments that they used to have. And that did surprise me a little bit. I guess the other area where I was, slightly surprised was the direction that they seem to be trying to take cybersecurity investments. So increases at DHS, obviously, again, big increases at DoD, but a fairly significant reduction to the science and technology staff at NIST. And I think there was maybe a press call where an administration figure said that the idea there, the intent was to bring security policy more to the operational level and away from kind of I guess NIST is more of an academic or lab-based setting. But still, I thought that was, given the amount of public priority or public emphasis we've seen on security, I was a little bit surprised that any group, even tangentially related to cybersecurity spending, was being targeted for cuts. So that was sort of where, to the extent that there were surprises, that's where I saw them.
And NIST is not a nominal player in cybersecurity. I mean, they don't set requirements, but their standards are de facto requirements across the government.
And they're currently in the middle of overhauling some of those special pubs, right? So it's not as though they had kind of taken a background role even temporarily. They're in the middle of some fairly significant work on their end. So again, I was a little bit surprised by that.
So I'd also like to ask you what you think this budget means for federal agencies and then from the contractor community as well. But first, before we go into that on a broader scale, can you talk about what it means, just this reduction in research and development funding? Is this going to have a major effect on agencies, the way they do things, the way they buy, and the contract community that supports them?
It will, if it goes through, it will have a fairly significant effect on the agencies that had substantial research and development funding to begin with. And on the civilian side, that's not a lot of them, but those that did, so, energy, parts of commerce, a couple others thrown in there, that was a fairly significant funding source, and for the contract community, a fairly significant source of revenue if they could speak to that. And so if that funding gets cut to the levels that the budget seems to want it to, yes, I think that probably would have an impact on a sort of subset of federal contractors. It's kind of a niche market. Obviously, not everyone plays there, but the people that do, that tends to be more or less what they do. And so that could be pretty significant if it goes through.
So budget overall, what are you hearing from your industry clients, and what are you telling them?
What are we hearing from them? I mean, so far, not much. The thing dropped yesterday, so people haven't had a lot of time, I think, to digest it. What we're telling them, I mean, broadly, what I've told you is sort of the immix market intelligence posture for the time being. What we generally tell the folks that we work with, and these are more sort of OEMs and ISVs, is what my sort of introductory caveat, which is that, these budgets, they get a lot of headlines. People always talk about, there's some pretty eye-popping potential reductions to agencies like USDA and state in there. None of this matters until Congress appropriates funding. And right now, there's no real indication that Congress will appropriate to the levels that this budget would ask for. So that's sort of, we kind of try to sound a cautionary note with things like this, which is, yes, it's alarming if you are a sales rep that works with the agriculture department and you see a 27% reduction, I think it is, from 17 levels in the request. But, pump the brakes a little bit. It's more important. The discussions on the Hill are in many ways more important to the people we work with than anything that's coming out of the White House.
Now, I know it's really hard to read these tea leaves. Last year was definitely a non-standard year, and non-standard is becoming the standard with all these CRs and all this stuff. So the odds that we actually see a real budget on time is probably slim, but we know that these discussions are definitely going to be had. From the tea leaves we have to read, how much of this budget do you think makes it through Congress?
That's wow. I generally lean towards, and this is sort of personal opinion of the way that I look at it. I lean towards the requested increases in here being much likelier to get through Congress than the requested decreases. So you look at the agencies that come out significantly ahead here. It's obviously the Defense Department, and then on the non-defense side, DHS in some areas, but big increases in investment in VA. And there's a significant requested increase at the Census Bureau for the 2020 count. And I think there's a fair amount of political will behind both of those things. VA, always fairly popular, management issues notwithstanding. And there is, I'm sensing a little bit of kind of growing recognition that in order for the 2020 census to go forward, anything like as planned, it's going to need an infusion of cash in 19. And so that's probably the likelier of the two. I would be surprised if FY19 appropriations include, again, the kind of double-digit reductions to state, agriculture, some of the other civilian agencies, EPA, that this budget is looking at significantly curtailing. I don't know that you're going to see that. I also think that in a lot of ways that depends on the outcome of the midterms, and I don't want to get into that discussion necessarily. But the composition of the House in particular is a big deal as far as what does and doesn't get written into appropriations.
Well, come September, we'll have you back to have a discussion about prognosticating on the midterms and what that'll mean for contractors and federal contracting and the like. But before we let you go today, anything else you wanted to add about this budget and what you found interesting?
I think we've covered most of it. I mean, what I always try to remind folks when things like these drop again is that it's going to grab a lot of attention for a little bit, but you have to take a slightly longer view and keep an eye on what happens on the Hill. That's the most important next step. To that end, the 2-year budget deal that was signed in last Friday is in some ways as significant as this request, because we've got kind of spending guidelines for defense and non-defense and even top line levels for agencies. I would say that, that is a useful sort of yardstick, maybe corrective almost, to keep in mind when you read through this thing, because that is where the intent of the legislature seems to be, and that's much more important.
Excellent. Chris, thanks for joining us today.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.